We're talking with Kari Lyderson. We're talking about her new book, Revolt on Goose Island. Uh, Kari, tell us a little bit about UE just as a union, and then tell me what and the listeners what you think the impact of this takeover has on the labor movement as a whole right now, if any.
Sure. Well, UE is a really fascinating history, and there's whole books just about the UE. They're an independent union that aren't part of the AFL-CIO. They were actually kicked out of the CIO during the anti-communist hysteria.
Back in the old days.
Yeah. And then they've organized, their base is electrical, radio, and machine, skilled sort of machine workers, but they've also organized, especially as things have sort of changed, the workforce has changed in recent decades. They've branched out to all different types of workers and been drawn to immigrant workers and, real workforces with progressive bents in general. And one of the things I thought was really neat to see with this struggle was how, even though they aren't part of the AFL-CIO, pretty much every union in Chicago or beyond Chicago, really came out to support them. And then as far as the broader impact for the labor movement, I think, it's probably even still too early to make a final, statement on that, but there have been definitely some specific things you could mention. In the book, I talk about workers at a factory that made sort of high-end lighters and novelty items called Colibri in Rhode Island, that the workers there were directly influenced and inspired by the UE to do a civil disobedience. And then there's an ongoing campaign that the UE and other Jobs with Justice and other groups have against Wells Fargo Bank, which is in a lot of ways a parallel but even larger situation than the Republic Windows Bank of America. And then I think the kind of victory with the Heart Marks suit makers within the past month was probably influenced by Republic Windows. So it does seem like, it's emboldened the labor movement and given people another tool to think about as a valid civil disobedience, generally, and maybe factory takeovers more specifically as a, something to actually consider.
Kari Lyderson, can you tell us a little bit about the politicians' involvement in the Republic takeover? We know Blagojevich made statements, and as I said, he looked good in these little clips. As you pointed out, he took a stand with the working man while probably sticking it to him in other ways. But let me ask you particularly about the role of Luis Gutierrez, who was the first elected alderman with the support of the Rainbow Coalition kind of vibe that was going on around Harold Washington. He later switched to Daley. Some people say he's been much better as a congressman than as an alderman, and seems to be sometimes progressive. You mentioned Joe Moore in there and a position he took, our progressive alderman from the 49th Ward. And you also mentioned how do you say the Whigs?
Whigs PAC, I
Whigs
think.
PAC,
Yeah.
I think, who was a former Peace Corps guy, and he played a little role in it. Talk to these three politicians a bit.
Yeah, well, that was, probably was one of the reasons that the bank did cave and that there was, so much buzz around this was the involvement of all these politicians. And Jan Schakowsky was also pretty vocal, right. And Dick Durbin, was also made a statement. My understanding was that Gutierrez and also Alderman Rick Munoz were pretty involved in the actual day-to-day negotiations with the bank and with helping to craft the strategy and, really being a presence there. And I'm sure the workers, people always get, I think, sometimes kind of annoyed when politicians get all the credit and, right. They feel like they're the ones really doing the work. But I think it is fair to say that, that all those people and probably Rick Munoz and Gutierrez in particular, really put a lot of energy and sort of passion into it. And yeah.
I mentioned the other alderman. I mentioned Joe because I know a lot of our listeners are in this ward, and he did make a pretty heavy statement being critical of the bank and on the, wanting to take a stand against the bank and their role. And I also mentioned the new alderman, Wagsby. I apologize for butchering his name because it was in his district, and he basically had talked to the police and encouraged them not to arrest people and take them out. So this was probably a good thing that they were doing it. What's the outcome of all of this? What's happened? The plant did close. I understand that someone in California bought it, and is it reopened now? What's the latest? Are the workers still there? What did they get?
Yeah, well, so the workers, once they got their $5 million, which, sounds like a lot, but it was divided between a lot of workers. So it really was just enough to maybe keep them going for a month or two. So they were still really in a bind, and they immediately hatched a plan to try to keep it open as a co-op. Which is a pretty big undertaking, to try to run a workers' co-op factory in this time in the U.S. So anyway, they were raising money to those ends, and but then they got an offer from this company called Serious Materials in California that makes ecological drywall and very high energy efficiency windows. So this company bought Republic Windows, which was a, sort of a difficult thing because it was in bankruptcy and Bank of America had to agree to the sale. So they did buy it. They had sort of a ceremonial type opening that Biden actually came to in the spring. And as of now, apparently there's about 15 workers there. Serious Materials has promised to rehire the whole union workforce, and I think it's happening much more slowly than the workers would have liked because, there's only 15 out of 200 some that have actually come back. And so it's, it's definitely a really happy ending to the story, but it's not over at all. And I think the union, even though as far as I know, they're very happy with Serious Materials, I think they still see themselves as, the union and Serious Materials as the owners, and they know that they're going to, still have to work to safeguard their rights and carry on the struggle.
Kari Lyderson, you are going to make a couple of appearances this next week. I know you're going to be at the 49th Ward Democratic Party meeting on Monday night, and everybody is invited to come hear you talk as well as hear other talking that goes on at that meeting. That's 7 o'clock at the Democratic Party headquarters at the corner of Ravenswood and Greenleaf. And then you got another one this week. You want to tell us where that's going to be?
Sure. July 23rd at the Stop Smiling magazine space in Wicker Park. So that's Thursday, July 23rd at 6:30 p.m. at 1371 North Milwaukee. And I think that event is actually RSVP recommended because it might possibly fill up. I think Stop Smiling, if you were to Google that, you could find the information to RSVP, but that's Thursday the 23rd.
Speaking of Googling, you could probably Google Kari Lyderson, and I was misspelling it with an O in. It's an E-N on the end. Kari, do you have a website or a way people can contact you?
Sure, I have a website, which my email is on there. My website is just my name, which is KariLydersen.com.
You got it right.
Right.